Welcome to the Pure Passion Podcast with Dr. David Kyle Foster. This podcast and our many other resources are made possible by our donors. Please support this ministry by going to our website, masteringlife.org.
Welcome to Pure Passion. I'm David Kyle Foster, your host. Today we have Eddie Capparucci, or should I say Dr. Eddie Capparucci, on the show. He is the author of Going Deeper. I don't know if you can see this, but Going Deeper, How Your Inner Child Impacts Your Sexual Addiction. The road to recovery goes through your childhood. Nothing could be truer. And then there's a workbook that goes with it. So it's Going Deeper, book and workbook, which I highly, highly recommend. I rarely highly recommend anything, but this book is awesome. So if you have a sexual addiction or you know someone who was, you need to read this book. How you doing, Eddie?
Dr. Foster, I'm doing amazing. Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'm really looking forward to spending some time talking with you.
Well, let's get going now. In chapter 1, you say sex addicts are not born, they're created. Wow, that is so true.
Yes, it is true. Because again, for me, I'm a big believer when it comes to a sexual addiction, a pornography addiction, which I struggled with myself. I've been in recovery for about 25 years now, but it was based on the environment that I was raised in.
Yeah.
There's so many emotional factors, because I believe there are really two key elements that happen that we wind up dealing with when it comes to this addiction. And the one that is the most difficult, the hardest thing for us to do is learning how to sit with emotional distress. And we can't do it.
Yeah, because there's nobody around to teach it. I mean, if we can't.
That's right. That's exactly it. So what happens? What does that kid do at that point in time? Because now he's sitting with this emotional pain. Nobody's instructing him. And he doesn't have a lot of worldly experiences. And he's more, emotionally based in his thinking than he is from a cognitive standpoint. So the logical solution is, I won't think about it.
Right.
And then how do we not think about it? I have to find ways to distract myself. Too much food, too much television, do all that. And it's the same thing we do when it comes to addiction. We don't want to confront those pains.
I think we don't think about it because we think we're stuck there and there's no help. And plus, we're so trapped in it, we don't want to give it up.
That's correct.
One of the things you say in the book is we love the most what we hate the most.
That's right. Yeah. So that to me is a key factor that in this whole inner child model is teaching men how to sit with their emotional pain, which they've never done before.
So what are the reasons that make sex addicts different than most men and boys?
Well, the thing about sex addiction, is the fact that it's not so much you want more, it's as you want different. I need different because I wind up building up a level of tolerance. Mm-hmm. And so now what I was looking at before, what I was doing before, just isn't stimulating enough, not producing enough of the, dopamine and the other neurochemicals that are going to get me a rush and buzz. So I have to come up with something different versus a quantity of let me spend more time doing it. And I think that's one of the biggest differences. I'll also say this though to you, and I don't know what you feel about this, but I think that the sex addict label is probably one of the most difficult ones for someone to wear. It has such a stigma to it.
Yeah. And they just don't want anybody to know. And what are some of the core emotional triggers that happen in someone that is a sex addict?
Right. Well, in my book of Going Deeper, what I've done is I identified 9 different inner children. and they're all based on different emotional pain points that people would suffer. So therefore, for example, the unnoticed child, his core emotional triggers may be, I feel invisible. Okay, I don't matter. I'm not important. So anything that may happen in his life today as an adult that triggers some of those feelings is going to cause his level of distress to increase dramatically, and therefore increase the likelihood or the risk of him running and acting out.
Mm.
There are hundreds of different emotional triggers, core emotional triggers.
Let's go into chapter 2, where you're talking about understanding the inner child. What are the conditions that children must have in order to ensure a healthy development that these kids aren't getting?
Right. Well, the thing that a child needs for healthy development is, one, for caregivers to teach them, one, how to attune. And attunement is that, you know what, you relate to me, I can relate to you. I can pick up your feelings. I can pick up your emotions. So a mom who is very attuned to her baby's, cries or wants or desires. And even when they become a toddler, it's like mommy pulling on her, skirt. And if he gets, go away, not now, I'm busy, leave me alone.
Yeah.
That's a message of, oh, I'm not that important.
Yeah.
Or I'm not wanted, versus a mother who takes a moment to say, okay, honey, what is it that you need? You tell them, and then they say, all right, look, I can help you, but not at this time. I have to do this, and then move them on. So we have that. We have, again, that ability.
Before you go on with
Yes.
that, an illustration that I like to give is, say you're a 7, 8, 9-year-old kid and you come home from school very excited over something that's happened there. And you come in the house and mom and dad are seated around the kitchen table and you're just bursting with excitement, and you suddenly tell them what happened and they say, shut up, go to your room. We don't have time for this.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you're going to learn that sharing your deep heart is going to bring pain.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And even something along the lines of, oh, that's nice. And then they go back to doing whatever they were doing.
Mm-hmm.
And those are those sometimes indirect messages that we receive that are just as powerful as the, hey, shut up and go up to your room. The direct messages that we get.
So what is the inner child and how does it operate?
Yeah, the inner child is, part of us that is from our past that is locked in this like time warp. He's sitting back there surrounded by all of our emotional scars that we have, many that we've forgotten about. We've repressed them very, very well.
Yeah.
I call it a storage unit. He has this storage unit that he goes into and pulls stuff out of. The inner child is one who is very frightened. He's frightened about things because, again, he doesn't want to sit with emotional distress. The inner child wants one thing: comfort. He wants comfort. And he found out at a very early age, the best way to get comfort is to distract yourself with something else. And sex, as you well know, is one of the most ultimate of all distractions that we can get caught up in that cycle.
What are some of the other What's some of the other damage that a poorly developed inner child can cause in a person's life?
Yeah, well, one, you could learn not to have empathy for other people.
Yeah.
Okay, that's horrible. I mean, that's a terrible thing goes on. You learn not to identify what are your true emotions. You could tell me if you're angry, if you're sad, if you're happy, or you're afraid, but you can't drill down and tell me, wow, you know what, that's like belittling to me. It's like the words are foreign to them.
Yeah.
It's hard to express those emotions. Even if you could identify them, it's difficult because the message that was given was your emotions don't matter, or which means nobody cared, or the fact that what you're feeling right now, again, it's just making it all about you.
So what then are the 5 objectives that you have in your book for healing the inner child?
Yeah, we go to the idea of, one, we need to identify what are those negative events that come into our life, okay, every day. Because what happens a lot, Dr. Foster, is that we don't recognize when negative things are really happening to us. I mean, or we may like just push it aside, blow it off, no big deal, leave it alone. I got to keep going. Because again, we got our head down and we're running through life. And what happens is those negatives start to build up upon one another. And before you know it, we are stressed out. And again, here we go. We're going to run for something. So we need to identify what those are. We need to be able to then identify what are the core emotional triggers events that will activate our kid. Mm-hmm. And once we know those, whenever an event does happen and our core emotional trigger had happened and our kid is activated, we need to be able to sit with that pain. See, this is where with my inner child model, this is where it's different than everything else, because before the event would happen, the trigger would happen, the anxiety would happen, and now we're running. But what I want is for people to slow everything down. Think mindfulness is a huge part of all of this. That's why being aware, was that a negative event? Does it correlate with my core emotional triggers that I have? It does. Okay. Kid probably get activated. Slow down. Let's sit with this discomfort. And then after we're done sitting with the discomfort for a while, say, yeah, that did hurt. What just happened? It hurt. Then what we're going to do is going to go to wise mind, where we're going to say, okay, I feel this. I feel rejected. But what's reality? And you're going to find in many times what we feel versus what is real are two different things.
Yeah.
We're too driven by our emotion and our emotional thinking rather than our rational thinking.
Yeah.
And then after we do this, then what we do is we make the right choice. So see, I've slowed everything down with those last 3 steps to get people to stop running away and start sitting with their pain, reflecting upon it, and then making the right choice.
I remember, I've been a sex addict myself, and I remember people, leaders asking me, what are you feeling now? And not being able to tell them. I'm going, what do you mean by that? I have no idea what you're talking about.
Right. It is one of the most interesting things that I've learned through all of this. Now, again, even myself, I didn't have a very high emotional IQ, but it might have been a little bit stronger than most of the men that I've worked with over the years. But I get men who they don't want to touch their emotions. They don't want to even think about them. When I try to sit there, that's why we have to give them the emotion wheel. Everybody has to have one so they can figure out this stuff. And some of them are looking and saying, I don't even know what these words mean.
Yeah, it's almost like it's working autonomically or something.
Yes, exactly. But what we're doing is we're reparenting. And let me share this with you. My original 9 kids started out with, when I first got this idea, was 9 reasons why men abuse sex. That's what I came up with, 9 reasons, like boredom, not being affirmed, unnoticed, emotionally voided, entitled, need for control, weak, inferior, and stress, and sexually abused.
Let's go into each one of those a little bit to talk about what it is and then what heals it or what changes it.
Okay, we'll do that. Let me just finish real quickly. Okay. Again, it started with reasons. But then I started thinking about what is the biggest deterrent that prevents someone from healing. And I think it's shame.
Yeah.
And what I did was I took this idea from someone else in a book I read 20 years ago, and I apologize. But what he did was he externalized the addict. And he would have people talk to their addict, and say, look, you're not going to be in charge anymore. This is my life, this and that. I didn't agree with all his concept, but he would want the addict to walk into an adult bookstore. So he would go into adult bookstore and say, we're not picking this stuff up. And I don't like any of that. That's a little bit too much for me. But what I decided at that point was say, you know what? Let me remove the addiction and let me externalize it. And I created the kids. And what happened was when I started introducing this to my client, they were like, I can do that. I can fix him. It's so much easier because I see him. He's the problem. Me. And it just opened up. It took away a lot of shame, because going back to the idea of the stigma, I don't wear the label, and I will not allow any of my clients to wear a label that says, I am a sex addict, I am a porn addict. The only label they wear is, I am the prince of the king. That is the only label. I have an addictive mind. My brain is an addictive brain. And that's the disorder. That's the disorder. I am not the disorder. My brain's the disorder. And that's what I try to communicate to men.
It's like the difference between I've done a bad thing and I'm the bad thing.
Correct. Exactly. So going through the children, if you would like me to do that.
Yeah, the core emotional triggers.
Yeah. The first child is the bored child, and they grew up in these environments where there was very little interaction with the family members. So therefore, they always felt rather isolated and alone, and they have to come up with ways to entertain themselves to feel good. So now, as an adult, anytime they have any kind of time where they don't know what to do, they're going to run to sex to try to fill that time.
Once they discover the intensity of it and the pleasure.
Correct. Because once again, just sitting causes distress. I can't tell you how many of my clients I've said, what we're going to do for a minute? I just want you to sit. Sit back in the couch, just sit for a moment, and just relax. You would not believe some of the reaction that happened, that they find it so different, the head moving all over, they're looking, they're like, they're waiting, they think I have a timer or something on it. The foot, legs are bouncing. It is just very difficult. So that's the bored child. The unaffirmed child grew up in an environment where there was a lot in the way of, there was very little in the way of praise, or there was a lot of criticism. And they took all of this on. So therefore, they suffer with low self-worth. And therefore, their desire is they're looking for affirmation. They're looking for attention. So if anything happens in their world now where they feel like they're not being praised or they've been overlooked, that's a big one for them. Somebody overlooked me. People go, oh, hey, blah, 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 having a conversation. Okay. And then they feel like they're dismissed. So that's big with the unaffirmed child. The next one is unnoticed. And the unnoticed child, somewhat like the bored child, but even the ones who felt like they never belonged, they had to chase people when they were kids. They had to chase the friends. We all know these kids. You can remember when you were growing up, and some of us were actually those kids. But it was like, they're there, they're present, but they're not really engaging. And nobody ever comes and knocks on their door to ask them to come out. So now, again, for them as adults, if they're feeling that, somebody, I'm being passed over, not being noticed, all the attention being put on these folks and nothing on me, that is going to be causing them to look to act out.
I remember I used to sit alone in the cafeteria in school, hoping somebody would come sit next to me.
Yeah.
But the message I was giving off was, I want to be alone.
Right.
And that could have been the reason they didn't come over.
Absolutely. It's like he doesn't want anybody around him.
Yeah.
He wants to be alone.
And to walk up to another table, that's to risk being told we don't want you to sit here.
Correct. Right. And most of these, with these kids, most people who have addiction, they don't want to take any of those kind of risks.
Yeah.
You're trying to play it safe. One of the strongest things that children need in their development is the sense of belonging.
Well, I have read on the unaffirmed child quite a lot. I think it's the most unaddressed problem in the world today.
I agree with you. And that's why we're seeing all these people who are doing with selfies and things like that they want to be noticed. They want to be seen. They want people praising on them.
Yeah.
They want to be somebody.
Yeah.
It's a big problem with our society today. And I think it's just going to continue to get worse.
Yeah. Throughout my career, I've done a lot of media, and I've sought awards from award organizations for each film I've done or TV show I've done. And the Lord just pointed out to me recently, your motivation has been to be affirmed because you were never affirmed as a child. It's not the pure motivation of loving the person that's going to be receiving. So that really caught me up short. My desire to be affirmed is really deep in me and entrenched. Right.
Well, but see, that's our brokenness that we have. But the problem that you have, Dr. Foster, is that many people who are stuck in addiction aren't aware of what their brokenness is.
Yeah.
And that's what the whole point of the book was about. Why? Why do I think, feel, and act the way I do? Why does sex have such a stronghold on my life? Because I believe if I know why, then I'm empowered. I'm empowered. I could now have control over forces that drive me to do that.
Yeah. Another story on that. I had some wilderness years in my Christian life, and, I was complaining to God about it. And I said, Lord, I'm dying here. I'm just dying, getting no affirmation. I'm getting no direction for my life. And he says back to me, that's exactly what's supposed to be happening. That the me that was the sex addict needed to die.
Right.
And I needed to be put into a situation where I wasn't getting anything that I thought I deserved, so that I would have to turn to God to get it.
Yeah.
And then, of course, others in small groups and things.
Right. And those are two of the teachings that we using the inner child model for those who feel unnoticed or unaffirmed, is that you are never unnoticed. That God is always with you. He's within you if you tap into that.
Yeah.
And he looks at you and he is proud of you. I talk to people about shame. A lot of folks, they don't want to face God because God doesn't sit there and say, come stand before me and show me your shame so I can mock you. He said, show me your shame so that I can remove it from you, because no child of mine should be filled with that shame.
Yeah, another fear of mine was that instead of hearing, well done, good and faithful servant, that when I got to heaven, and I would get to heaven because I'm born again, but when I got there, I wouldn't hear well done. I'd see disappointment in God's face because of the failures I had along the way.
Right.
How does that get turned around?
Because then we turn to Jesus Christ, okay? Because Jesus Christ is there with us. And Jesus, because of what Jesus has done, all our sins, past, present, and future, are forgiven. Okay, as long as we're sitting here saying, yes, Lord, I do want to be forgiven. So therefore, on that day of judgment, Dr. Foster, you and I sit there and stand there, God is going to be saying, job well done. Why? Because Jesus is saying, he is mine. He is mine.
Yeah.
And I have selected him.
Yeah. And I knew everything he was going to do wrong before I even saved it.
Correct. Before he even did. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
So that is part of what I do in teaching men who could, again, go back to that shame. And it's like, no, I can't go to church. I struggle to read the Bible. I struggle to pray because I just feel like he will not forgive what I have done.
Yeah.
And we have to explain to them that what makes you different.
Yeah.
Okay, you believe, you're a believer.
Right.
So why would he not forgive you? Are you sorry? Are you sorry for your sin? Do you repent? Yes, I do. Well, then you know what? You're just like the rest of us.
Mm.
He forgives. God has the amazing, God is all about love.
Mm.
He is love, and he wants that relationship with us. He wants it so much that he does sacrifice his son.
Yeah, and the death of his son paid the penalty for the sin. So the Father's not out there going, oh, I'm going to ding you for this and I'm going to ding you for that.
Right.
He sees the perfection of Jesus Christ, his son.
Correct. Right. And he doesn't expect us to be perfect. He knows that it's, this is that state of, sanctification. We are trying to move down the pathway to be Christ-like, but we'll be light years away from that, on the day when he calls us home.
Yeah.
We're just not going to be there. Hopefully we've moved a lot of these ugly scales, but we're still flesh.
Well, you've been talking a lot about, I'm glad you brought up the God factor, because most people just do the horizontal work in their support group or their home fellowship group or with a therapist, and they forget about the vertical. And it's the vertical that transforms. It's the horizontal that helps you maintain sobriety, but it's the vertical that transforms from the inside out.
Right. And that's what happened to me. That's my story. So therefore, I can share that with people to let them know that, yes, I learned a lot. I got a lot of great tools, in my recovery and how I should not do that bad behavior anymore.
Mm.
But the heart hadn't changed. And it was only when, and this didn't really happen. I grew up Catholic. If you got a second, I could share that with you. I grew up Catholic, and so I never read the Bible, nothing. And I got married, my third marriage, because I blew through two of them with my addiction. Mm-hmm. And 25 years ago, I met a woman, and we wound up getting married, and we went to church, and we moved. I heard, well, I didn't hear anything at the point. I thought God was bringing us down there for a job opportunity. That's not why God brought me down there. God brought me down there so I could sit in a pew and I could hear it's about a relationship with Jesus Christ. And like the first time I ever heard that, I had no idea what it meant. I was bewildered by it, saying, how can you have a relationship with somebody I can't talk to, I can't see, I can't feel, nothing? And that got me down this long journey where a lot of great mentors who guided my path to Christianity, including reading the Bible. I read it 4 times in a period of 2 years. Mm-hmm. And I finally said, wow, I get it. This is how I understand what Christianity is about. I understand that I am loved. And after that happened, I was in corporate America. I was a marketing and advertising guy for 25 years. And God came knocking and said, hey, guess what, Eddie? I got something else for you. I'm like, no, I don't want anything else. I like what I'm doing. I like my job and all that. He goes, no, I have something else. I go, that's not part of the deal. Part of the deal was I was going to get close to you and we were going to be like in a good relationship. He goes, no, that was your deal. He goes, this is mine. He goes, you're going to be a Christian counselor. I'm like, I don't even know what a Christian counselor is. What are you talking about? And sure enough, I got confirmation from some people. Fought him for a couple of years, but then after it all came together, I said, I surrender, went back to school, got another master's degree, did all the state work, opened up a practice. It was a private practice, and it was a general practice. And then all of a sudden, these guys start coming into my office that are struggling with pornography and sex addiction. I'm like, oh my God, these guys look like me. And then I'm like, now I know what this is about. That's who he wants me to focus on. So I went back and I got my certifications in that area. And here we are almost 10 years later. This is what we're doing, the ministry that we have.
Well, not only did he do that, he gave you insights that are really rare for so many insights into human behavior. He's really anointed you and fed you a lot of inside information. I know you probably learned some of it by books, but
Right.
the really deep stuff you learn from God, don't you?
Absolutely. And that's what I have a new book that just launched on Monday called Why Men Struggle to Love. And
I
it's
need
all
that
about,
book.
okay. Lots of men need that book.
Yeah.
And their wives are the ones who are going to be driving them to that.
Yeah.
But it's about, again, the idea that many men who struggle with a sex or porn addiction also have a very low emotional IQ that we were talking about before.
Yeah.
They can't tell you what they feel. They can't express their emotion, and they can't take on anybody else's emotion. Like, no. They'll try to fix it. They'll minimize it, or they'll walk away. And this is walking you through how did that happen, and then and there's a lot in here about how God is the one that helped to turn all of that around, to take our hard hearts, because that's what we have. We have hard heart, and how to circumcise them so we can start taking that darkness out of it.
Yeah. Well, I know that as a former sex addict that I was filled with self-hatred, which caused me to flee to pleasurable things. And I was also afraid of intimacy. So I didn't want to flee to a relationship. I wanted to flee from just an encounter. I wanted to flee to just an encounter that I could then leave.
Right. Correct.
Yeah.
Right.
So these nine core emotional triggers, give me a few more before we run out of time.
Right. These are the 9 children. There's 9 kids. And then each of these kids have core emotional triggers. So you're trying to figure out which kid do you associate with, and then which of those core emotional triggers associated with the kid do they sting the most. So therefore, we wind up with a list of maybe 8 to 10 core emotional triggers that people memorize. So now I know if something happened, oh yes, it hit on this one. I feel rejected right now, or I feel abandoned right now, whatever goes on there.
And then what do you do in that moment?
And then once you do that, then you sit with that pain, right? Remember, we don't want to run away. We've got to sit with the fact of what I feel. And then I'm going to go to, okay, what I feel versus what is real. Was I really rejected or was I not?
So if you're sitting there feeling the pain, doesn't that make the desire for pleasure even intensify, because it's getting more oppressive of them? As I'm sitting here, I'm feeling more and more bad, and this memory of all these pleasures come in. That must be a hard thing to achieve.
This is about the transformation of the man. Okay, I'm not teaching men how to just get rid of a bad behavior. I'm teaching men how to do the right thing
and to mature.
But yes, there's the word. We are emotionally immature, and we have to grow up. And part of growing up is sitting with pain and realizing it's not going to kill me, so I don't have to run away from it. I don't have to go do something else to distract myself. And when I talk about sitting with it, we're talking about sitting with it for 5-10 minutes. Just when we just understand what that's about before we go and say, okay, now let me rationalize what is really happening. Because remember what I told you, in most cases, the feelings that you have don't match up with the circumstances that you're faced with.
Yeah. So a few more. We're almost out of time, but you've got the entitled child,
well,
the
let me
inferior
talk.
child, the stress.
I got the emotionally voided child, which is the number one kid. As you can imagine, everybody struggles with the emotionally voided child. They don't know how to feel. The need for control kid grew up in an environment that is very hectic. So therefore, they were the ones who paid the price for whatever happened. So their worldview is, if I can control things, then bad things won't happen. As you know, that never works, right?
A sexual abuse victim would probably have that as a part of their.
Yeah, they would definitely have part of that. So therefore, whenever they have a situation where they have no control, they're off and running. The entitled child is not the entitled child in the sense that, oh, I just deserve everything. What it is these kids grew up feeling devalued. They lacked a voice. They felt their needs didn't matter. They were very often falsely accused of things. So therefore, they turned to sex as that reward for them, to make them feel better for the abuses that they suffer.
And they feel that they deserve it after all that they've gone through.
Correct. The inferior, weak child, they were conditioned to believe they are different than their siblings or their peers. They don't measure up. They're not good enough. So therefore, if something happens that makes them feel weak or feel like then what they're going to do is they're going to run to sex to either, one, confirm the fact that I am weak, or two, to do something that goes totally against it. It's a 180 to show that I'm strong. And then you have the stressed child, again, grew up in a major chaotic environment. They use sex as a stress buster. He's the guy who winds up masturbating 3-4 times a day because his life is just so stressed out. And then the last child is the child who suffered with early sexual stimulation, which means he saw pornography at a very early age, or perhaps people engaging in a sexual activity, or those who were sexually abused. And for them, they're either going to latch on to sex to become very promiscuous with many people, or they're not going to want to have sex with other people at all. They'll focus more on pornography and other things behind the scenes.
Well, we live in a world of adolescents these days, and sex addiction is epidemic. It's pandemic. It's everywhere. And I'm so glad you've written this book. It's called Going Deeper. And then you have a workbook that goes with it. And there's exercises in there that you can do. There's insights galore in this book. I'm so glad you wrote it. Dr. Eddie Capparucci, give us your website, how people can contact you.
Yes, they can. They go to www.innerchild- don't forget the dash, sexaddiction.com. So it's innerchild-sexaddiction.com. And they'll find a lot of information about each of the kids, talking more about the core emotional triggers, the process itself. And there's also, for those people, a lot of people, as you know, Dr. Foster, they can't afford therapy. So what I did was I created a 12-part series for them. That's for $340 that they can go in, they can walk through the whole book. And it's me doing videos, walking them through the whole thing.
Well, that's the price of 3 sessions with the therapist. That's
yes, that's right. And again, because God didn't put me here to be rich, make myself rich. Okay, most of those programs cost $1,500, $2,500. That's not the point. I was put here to help to heal, help to heal men, help to heal their relationships. That this is a calling. It's not a job for me.
That's clear to me. Well, if you are a sex addict, just addicted to sexually acting out in one way or the other, I highly recommend Going Deeper and going to Eddie's website to get the videos and the other resources he has there. This is a ministry for such a time as this, and we just bless you and welcome you back next time. God bless.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. Remember, much of Dr. Foster's teaching has been taken from his new book entitled Sexual Healing Reference Edition, available at our website, masteringlife.org. This podcast and our many other resources are available because of our donors. If you are one of them, thank you. If you would like to join in supporting us, please visit masteringlife.org.